Have you ever felt that something controls you from within, even when your intention was to do the opposite, as if there were a silent, invisible force shaping your choices, your reactions, even your words? Even without your consent, this force is neither evil nor mystical. It is human and deeply personal, formed from childhood, fueled by everything you were taught to repress: your anger, your sadness, your misunderstood courage, your sexuality, your fears, your impulses for expression or defense. Everything you once believed you needed to hide to be loved or accepted. This force is called the shadow. Carl Jung didn't see it as an inner monster. He saw the shadow as a legitimate part of the psyche. Renegade, yes, but full of life, energy, and truths you haven't yet been able to face. And here's the truth few have the courage to accept. The shadow doesn't disappear just because you pretend it's not there. It waits, observes, gathers strength, and when you least expect it, it takes control. Not as an external attack, but as attitudes, decisions, and emotions that seem to come from another place within you, a you that you swore you weren't. You judge others, you criticize, you get irritated by their attitudes, but in many cases, what you're seeing outside is just a reflection of what you haven't had the courage to face within. And until this confrontation happens, you'll remain trapped in an invisible cycle, commanded by emotions you think you understand, but that are actually acting behind the scenes in the unconscious. Integrating the shadow is for the strong, for those who are exhausted from blaming others, for those who already understand that pointing the finger is easy, but looking in the mirror is what truly transforms. This video is not an easy step-by-step guide or a comfort for the ego. It's a call for those ready to truly grow, for those who understand that running from pain only prolongs it, and that true emotional freedom begins when you stop running and choose to listen to what your own soul is trying to say. The shadow isn't what most people imagine. It's not simply the bad side of your personality, not an inner demon to be eradicated, nor a curse to fight against. Carl Jung saw the shadow as a vital part of the human psyche, a hidden territory where all the aspects rest that your ego, conditioned by society, family, and your own expectations, decided to hide. From childhood, you were taught that certain behaviors are acceptable while others are not. You learned to smile when you wanted to cry, to be kind when you wanted to scream, to repress your anger, your ambition, your fear, your sensuality, your vulnerability. Everything that didn't fit the mask you were forced to wear, you pushed into the basement of your mind. In that basement, that collection of renegade pieces of yourself is what Jung called the shadow. But here lies the truth few have the courage to accept. The shadow isn't made only of violent impulses or destructive desires. It also holds your creative strength, your forgotten passion, your stifled courage, your lost spontaneity. The shadow carries both your capacity for destruction and your potential for transformation. Ignoring it is choosing to live a mutilated life. Integrating it is accepting the totality of your existence. When you understand the shadow, you understand that a human being is not just light but also darkness. And denying that darkness is renouncing your own vital strength. The shadow holds the keys to your self-knowledge, to your emotional growth, to the construction of true maturity. But those keys can only be conquered through the brutal courage to look within, without masks, without excuses, without mercy. Without integrating the shadow, the psyche becomes unbalanced. Repressed energy turns corrosive, fueling symptoms like anxiety, depression, outbursts of anger, compulsions, self-sabotage, and a sense of existential emptiness. The ignored shadow doesn't disappear. It simply finds other, more painful, and self-destructive ways to manifest. And this is precisely where emotional projection comes into play. When you don't recognize your own shadow, your unconscious takes it upon itself to show it to you, using others as a mirror. In the next part, we'll explore in depth how this mechanism operates in your daily life and how it relentlessly reveals what you try hardest to hide from yourself. When you don't see what exists within you, the world becomes a mirror, but not a clear mirror, a distorted one, filtered through the lenses of the unconscious. Carl Jung called this projection the mechanism by which the repressed content of the psyche, your unrecognized shadow, is projected onto others. You don't see it in yourself, so your unconscious projects it outward. And that's how others' behavior starts to bother you more than it should, triggering disproportionate, irrational, and often inexplicable reactions. Emotional projection is a brutally common phenomenon, but rarely understood. You feel anger towards someone for being arrogant, but deep down, it's your own repressed need to assert yourself. You judge someone for being selfish when, in truth, it's you who's been swallowing your desires and accumulating resentment for never putting yourself first. You get irritated with people who express themselves too much because perhaps you learned early on that expressing emotions is a sign of weakness. The other becomes the stage where your unconscious enacts everything you haven't had the courage to face within yourself. That's the point. Projection isn't a conscious choice, it's a psychic defense. The ego, to preserve itself, needs to keep intact the image it has built of itself. So everything that threatens that image, everything that goes against the character it believes itself to be, is expelled to the external world, and you start seeing monsters in others without realizing that you're actually running from your own reflections. How many relationships have you destroyed by not realizing the problem wasn't the other person, but the way they triggered your shadow? How many times have you distanced yourself from someone without being able to explain exactly why, only because their presence made you feel something you couldn't name? How many times have you hated someone who, without intending to, embodied what you fought hardest to keep buried? Projection turns the world into a battlefield, but that war is happening inside you. It blinds you, limits you, and prevents you from growing. And there's only one way to break this cycle. Take responsibility for your emotions. Ask yourself with brutal honesty, what exactly about that person bothers me so much, and why? But be careful. This process isn't pleasant. It demands that you abandon the comfortable position of victim and take on the difficult task of examining your soul. And it's precisely here that transformation begins, when you stop running and start listening to what your shadow is trying to say. Because if you have enough courage to face this discomfort, you'll discover that the pain of projection is, in reality, your psyche's invitation to something greater. In the next part, we'll explore what happens when you reject that invitation, what happens when you spend your life ignoring your shadow, and without realizing it, become exactly what you most condemn in others. Ignoring the shadow is like trying to control a fire by simply closing your eyes. You can pretend nothing's happening. You can believe the problem isn't yours. You can even build theories to justify your blindness. But the fire keeps burning, and the more you refuse to see it, the more it consumes you. When you project your repressed aspects onto the external world, you lose contact with your internal reality. You start waging imaginary wars, seeing enemies where there are only reflections, fighting in others what you secretly fear finding in yourself. But what you don't understand or refuse to accept is that what you hate outside is silently shaping who you become inside. Carl Jung made it clear, everything we don't confront in our consciousness appears in our lives as fate. If you don't face your repressed anger, it turns into resentment and passive aggression. If you deny your envy, it transforms into silent bitterness. If you hide your ambition, it festers into frustration and self-pity. Gradually, you stop being who you think you are and become exactly what you swore to fight against. That's how hypocritical moralists are born, publicly condemning the very impulses they secretly live. That's how compulsive altruists emerge, who by over-sacrificing feed a subterranean hatred for those who don't reciprocate. That's how good men and women become oppressors in their homes, their workplaces, their relationships, suffocated by the weight of what they never had the courage to integrate. You can spend your whole life running, justifying, pointing the finger outward, but the truth is relentless. What you reject in yourself doesn't disappear. It simply finds new mass to manifest, and the more you ignore it, the stronger it becomes. Until the day there's no real difference between who you thought you were and what you most despised. The unintegrated shadow takes the wheel of your life and drives without your permission. It sabotages your relationships, destroys your dreams, undermines your strength, and thwarts every step you try to take towards something greater. And you, blinded by pride, will keep blaming the world without realizing the enemy was always within. But there's a way out. There's a path for this force to stop destroying you and start empowering you. A way to transform poison into medicine, hatred into self-knowledge, shame into personal power. And that path begins with a conscious decision to integrate the shadow, to bring it into the light of consciousness. In the next part, we'll dive into this transformation process. You'll understand how to begin the journey of shadow integration and what's truly needed to regain control of your mind and your life. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's core ideas and gives you tools to understand yourself more deeply. The link is in the pinned comment. Integrating the shadow isn't a simple task. It's not a symbolic gesture or a superficial mental decision. Integrating the shadow is a difficult, painful, and above all, transformative process. It's consciously walking into the forbidden territory of your own soul, facing everything you've spent your life trying to avoid. The first step is brutal recognition. You need to admit that the darkness exists within you, without excuses, without rationalizations, without trying to soften the impact. There's anger in you, there's envy, there's a desire for domination, a wish for revenge, fear of failure, vanity, pride, and there's also repressed talent, forgotten courage, dormant potential. Denying any of these parts perpetuates the shadow's dominance. The second step is conscious observation. The shadow reveals itself in your most intense and disproportionate reactions, when you feel hatred for someone without an apparent reason, when you explode with anger over something small, when you feel shame for a legitimate part of yourself. Those are the moments when the shadow whispers. Learn to observe without judging, without trying to justify yourself. Just observe. Just acknowledge. The third step is compassionate acceptance. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean giving into it or justifying destructive behaviors. It means accepting that you're a complete human being, made of light and darkness, strength and weakness. There's no true emotional maturity without this acceptance. Without it, you'll always be trapped in a sterile internal struggle, trying to amputate vital parts of yourself to fit an unreal image of perfection. But integrating the shadow alone isn't always possible. Often you'll need support, dream analysis, deep and sincere self-reflection, the practice of self-observation, and above all, working with a therapist specialized in Jungian analytical psychology can be a powerful tool in this process. A trained therapist knows how to help you navigate the layers of the unconscious, how to identify projection patterns, how to recognize the self-destructive complexes that keep you trapped. The true alchemy happens when you transform what was once a source of shame into a source of strength. When you realize that your anger can become assertiveness, that your vanity can be redirected into genuine self-care, that your envy can reveal legitimate desires for growth, the shadow doesn't need to destroy you. If worked with, it can become the foundation of your true inner freedom. But don't fool yourself. Integrating the shadow is an ongoing process. There's no finish line, no point where you become pure or enlightened. The human psyche is dynamic, and new shadows emerge throughout life. The point isn't to eliminate the darkness, but to keep consciousness active, vigilant, integrated. And it's when you start integrating your own shadow that something extraordinary happens. Your relationship with the world changes. Emotional projection diminishes. Relationships become more genuine. You stop being a hostage to your automatic reactions and start responding to the world from an internal center of strength and balance. In the next part, we'll dive into this visible transformation, how the process of shadow integration not only changes you internally, but reflects a more balanced, authentic personality to the world, and above all, free. When you begin to integrate your shadow, the world around you changes. But the truth is, you're the one who changed. What once seemed unbearable in others now becomes understandable. What once provoked hatred, envy, repulsion, or judgment now awakens compassion, empathy, and discernment. You stop seeing enemies everywhere and start seeing human beings as flawed and contradictory as you are. Emotional projection loses its power because the source of the conflict has been recognized. You no longer need to unload your frustrations on others. You no longer need to justify your own pain by attacking, judging, or rejecting the external world. You learn to hold the mirror to your own face and ask yourself with courage, what does this reaction reveal about me? This transformation is profound. It's not just a change in behavior. It's a change in the structure of your perception. The integrated shadow offers something the ego alone could never achieve: balance. A balance that isn't fragile like pretense or tense like repression, but solid like a rock that has survived all internal storms. The result of this spills over into practical life. Your relationships improve because you no longer seek in others the approval you once lacked. Others' criticism no longer wounds you because you're no longer a slave to the need to seem perfect. You become more authentic because you no longer need to hide who you are. You become stronger because you no longer waste energy fighting against yourself. And this transformation doesn't go unnoticed. People around you feel the difference. Some draw closer, recognizing in you a more genuine, secure, and vibrant presence. Others pull away, unable to deal with someone who no longer plays the unconscious games of projection and blame. This is part of the process. Integrating the shadow is also about purifying the environment around you. Carl Jung taught us that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. True maturity arises from this courageous confrontation with your own soul. True strength emerges when you stop running from yourself. But there's one final piece we need to address: the real difficulty of walking this path alone. No matter how strong you are, there are moments when the weight of the shadow is too great to bear without support. There are practical techniques and specific approaches that can guide you in this process of self-discovery and integration with more safety and effectiveness. In the next and final part, we'll talk directly about this: how to seek help, how to strengthen your internal process, and most importantly, how to keep evolving without ever betraying your essence. You've spent your life trying to hide your flaws, trying to be what others expected, adjusting to fit molds that were never made for you. You've tried to suppress impulses, feelings, inner truths, believing this would make you stronger, more accepted, more correct. But all this has only served to feed the shadow. It has only strengthened what you feared. The truth is, there's no possible peace while you're at war with yourself.